The therapists who use words like that's a trauma wound or a trauma bond, that's anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, but then they just label. They don't explain, well, what is an avoidant attachment? What is a trauma bond? It's incredibly important for the clients to understand what that means. Well, welcome to Dating Deja Vu, the podcast where we talk about your patterns, your pitfalls, and your personal growth in modern dating. I'm your host, Christina Hathaway, marriage and family therapist and dating and relationship expert. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about when the therapist or coach is actually the problem. It's not you, it's your shrink. So if your dating and love life looks a lot of bit of the same, it might be deja vu, but it also might be you. So let's figure it out together. What is up, Deja Crew? Welcome back to another fabulous episode of your favorite and my favorite dating and relationship podcast, Dating Deja Vu. For those of you from TikTok, welcome. We continue to see a rise in our followers on TikTok, and that correlates with the rise in our followers here at the podcast. For those of you who are new, if you haven't already, I'd love for you to hit that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you're watching this on YouTube. I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification button. The more that people do that, as well as leave 5-star ratings and reviews, the more that we get to be seen by others. That is important to you because the more people hear this, the more likely you'll meet someone who listens to this podcast and they'll be in alignment with what we learn here. So you're actually helping yourself. All right. I want to ask you, have you ever left like a couples session, whether that's a relationship coach or a relationship therapist, feeling even more confused, more triggered, maybe even more blamed, shut down when you leave? The reason I ask this is because I have heard this time and time again from my current clients. They go to a therapist, they're seeking help, but there's things that the therapist does that causes their relationship really even more damage, which is terrible because our number one goal when I was practicing as a therapist is do no harm, but we end up doing harm. And so today we're pulling back the curtain on something that people don't talk about, and that is bad relationship coaches and bad therapists. Yes, they exist. And yes, again, they can do a lot of damage. So I want to give you a little bit of a backup story to why I moved from relationship therapy to relationship coaching and therapy in general. So I enjoy being a therapist. I enjoy like helping people understand their minds and what's going on and how that affects their nervous systems, their bodies, etc. However, I don't love the idea of diagnosing people. I don't love the idea of having to take insurance. And now both of those things can be actually you do have to have a diagnosis to practice therapy for the client to be in therapy, I believe. I think that's true in my state. I don't know if that's true in all states, but I didn't love diagnosing people. The other thing I didn't love is oftentimes because of the diagnoses, people tend to think, well, this is just who I am. This is a struggle that I have, like nothing can change. Whereas with coaching, I feel it's very future focused. I feel like you understand the past, but we're not necessarily processing the past. We are understanding it so that we can understand why we do things, but then using that information to change our future. And I think that's really important to note the difference. The other thing, though, is I see a lot of therapists and maybe even life coaches as well, having clients for decades, literal decades. I know someone who's had the same therapist since I've known her, and I've known her for 10 years this year. And this kind of job security therapy is baffling to me. I have a client, she's been with me 2 months. When they sign up, they sign a 3-month agreement. And she goes, hey, wondering if when we're up, like I feel like we're up on our 3-month agreement. And I was like, oh no, you still have a month. And she goes, oh my God. She goes, it just feels like so long because I've done so much work in such little time. And that's how I roll. Now, that's not everyone's case, right? In this case, this person is very emotionally intelligent. There were definitely things that we had to fix in order to create some space in her mind to open herself up to a relationship. But I see that often, that job security therapy, job security coaching, where we're kind of just listening. We're not necessarily giving solutions. And I'm a little bit more solution focused, and what changes do we need to make right now? So these main talking points, they may not apply to you, but this is just my experience and the feedback from my own clients, which I think is really important. And so here we go. Red flag number one is they play referee, not facilitator. If the therapist is just letting each of you take turns venting while just nodding and saying, "Oh, how does that make you feel?" They're not guiding any growth. They're literally just facilitating a slow motion crash. When in therapy or coaching, at least the way that I've been trained, we want to look at the process instead of the content. Meaning, I want to look at how you're communicating, not what you're communicating. Now, yes, I can pay attention to what you're communicating, but that therapist who's just letting you vent, 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 vent. Okay, great. This was a great session. Have a nice day. There's no resolution. There's no how do we engage in conflict a bit better. There is no how does that, when she speaks to you in that way, how does that make you feel? When he speaks to you that way, how does that make you feel? When you're speaking to your partner in that way, what are you trying to convey? And I'm wondering why it comes out as anger when it sounds like sadness. Like, those are the types of things that I would be asking. The more process than the content. But again, that refereeing is a way to have job security. I don't know how long, I don't know how many referrals that person would have, because I don't know how successful they would be, but that is ultimately a red flag. And if you're feeling like your coach or your therapist is just ping ponging, nodding off, saying, "Great. And how does that make you feel?" That's a red flag. All right. So red flag number two is they label but don't teach. The therapists who use words like "that's a trauma wound" or a trauma bond, "that's anxious attachment" or avoidant attachment, but then they just label. They don't explain, well, what is an avoidant attachment? What is a trauma bond? It's incredibly important for the clients to understand what that means. It gives them a sense of clarity. It gives them a sense of understanding to why they behave in the way that they do, that there's actually a name for it. It also gives them a sense of like grace. Oh, I'm not the only one who deals with this. Like, there's actual names for these things and process. And a lot of times when we can teach, hey, this is all you know because this is how you were raised. That is so healing, because I could say that's what you've known up to this point. Now let me help facilitate change and teach you and guide you in learning a new way. But this kind of broad, that's your anxious attachment. It's almost as if they're diagnosing, right, a broken bone, like a doctor, like, oh, that's a broken bone. All right, have a good day. Like, a doctor wouldn't do that. They say, your bone is broken. This is where it's broken. They'd show you the x-ray, and then they say, and then this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it in the cast and da 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 da. And then after 8 weeks, we're going to do, right? They're going to give you a game plan. So there's two things here. It's kind of labeling without educating, but also not giving you a game plan and understanding what it will look like. I take on just a handful of new clients here and there because I'm pretty full at the moment. And the reason why I do have that boundary is also because I thoroughly think through, what I'm going to do with that couple or that person. And I want to have these steps in my head of like what this process looks like for them. So that is another red flag. Okay. Red flag number 3, they over pathologize one person. This is a biased babe, a biased therapist. If they are constantly siding with one person and puts all the work on the other person, they're reinforcing power imbalances and not resolving them. Okay. I cannot tell you how many of my couples have come in and be like, well, you know, the entire time they were talking about me and the things I needed to change. Or the opposite is true, where a therapist will like just let someone who is the cause of a lot of the struggles stay the same. So they're not calling them out on like their behavior and their responsibility in what's happening in the relationship. So you have one or two sides there, right? Where they're just, oh, he's the problem. I was listening to that Ruby Frankie, that like crazy Mormon mom that, was abusing her kids. And if you ever listen to that story, it's loco. If you want to hear the whole thing, listen to it on Serialously. It's a podcast. She does a good breakdown of it. It's pretty long, but it's pretty like, what the fuck? And a part of it, this therapist who ended up being not a licensed therapist and lost her license from the board of Utah, she scapegoated the husband. And why'd she scapegoat the husband? Because she's a lesbian, but she's not telling anyone she's a lesbian because not that lesbians scapegoat guys. That sounded really bad. She's a lesbian in hiding, so she can't even be her true self. So if she can't be her true self, then men can't be with women either, right? That's all hearsay, but it's just like she scapegoated the husband and made him leave the home, and he was gone for a year. Now, jury's out on that guy, but still, I think of that like, oh, you're the problem. She's not the problem. And one person is doing the work. Why is this important for you guys? You both are equally involved in what's going on. And even if it's a passive person, your being passive is a part of the problem. If they're being aggressive, yes, if they're being aggressive, yes, from the outside looking in, like they look like the problem. But if you're not standing up for yourself, holding strong boundaries, maybe even leaving because they're aggressive. Obviously, we don't want people being aggressive in relationships. What I'm solely talking about here is like aggressive communication, but still, neither are good. Then that's what contributes to the problem. Each person needs to recognize their input. Now, where does this vary or where does this differ is when we have issues with cheating, right? It's not that, can there be issues in the relationship that can exacerbate or make worse someone's reasons for cheating? Sure, but that's not equal responsibility there. So that would be the caveat, where also physical abuse, of course. So physical abuse is the issue. That is a different story. If fidelity is the issue, that is a different story. But for the general population, being able to work with couples, most of the time, you're equally involved in the mess. So that is red flag number 3. Red flag number 4 is they don't understand trauma-informed dynamics. This could be a coach specifically saying they're a dating and relationship coach, relationship expert, psychological dating coach. Maybe they're a therapist too. Kind of behavioral surface level bullshit of just communicate more, right? Just tell her your feelings. Tell her how you feel. If you don't feel safe expressing yourself, because when you express yourself in childhood, you get the shit beat out of you, it's not going to feel safe in your intimate relationship. And if this person doesn't understand that and is trying to force you into doing something that feels unsafe for you, that is abusive. That is not okay. It's honestly like re-traumatizing you in a way. I'm saying that and I'm laughing about it because could that happen? Sure. Am I being dramatic? Yes. But being able to look at someone who is an expert in emotional attunement, so understanding your emotionality. I love parts work, which I'm actually going to talk about in an upcoming episode. Relational dynamics, how our relationships are formed in our early childhood and how those formations affect how we relate in adulthood and so on, what trauma bonds look like, etc. They should be slowing you down, right? They should be able to help you, again, create clarity in why things are happening the way they're happening. They should never be someone who is forcing you to do things that your nervous system is not ready to do, ultimately causing even more conflict damage to the relationship. So trauma informed, what does that mean? Trauma informed. They don't have to go to like a trauma informed class. I hear that shit all the time now, but just like understanding like what is the root cause to why I'm doing the things I'm doing. So some of the questions you can ask your dating coach or therapist is simply that, like, what is your kind of game now that you've understood us? I'd love to hear your plan of how to work with us moving forward. A lot of therapists, I believe in most states, have to create a treatment plan that discusses the goals, discusses the objectives and the treatment goal, the treatment plan itself. So the steps that it will take. I, as a relationship coach, will create something similar to that. And we're following that pace along the way. That doesn't mean that things don't come up, right? But at least it gives it a game plan. So I want to give you guys some questions to ask your coach or your therapist to see if they're a good fit for you, especially if you just feel like you're in like coaching and therapy deja vu. It's just the same shit over and over again. So first things that you want to ask is for your plan. And I know as a therapist, I had to write treatment plans. As a dating and relationship coach, I write a coaching plan. It is what I think are the next best steps for that couple or that individual. And they receive that before I take any money. They get that for free. They get my thoughts and my time, because it does take time to put together, on what are the best next steps. And that's something that you should be receiving as well to ensure that this person gets it. I feel like they have a game plan. We're not just sitting here shooting the shit. We are actually doing work. And I think that's really important. And I want to say there is a blend, there is a balance of like letting people vent, right? And I want to come to number 2 with that. How do they treat the couple? For me, when I was doing therapy, I would see one person alone and the other person alone, and then I would bring them together because I want to learn them. I want to learn their upbringing, their background, kind of why they tick, how they tick. Then in the sessions together, helping each of them understand these most vulnerable parts of their partner and how they show up when they're in a protective state, but also how the partner can show up to show that they're safe so that the protective states don't have to show up. And that's a question too. Do you meet with us separately and together? How do you take a history of why we're the way we are? Kind of just asking the process, like, what does this look like? Because I'm going to say this and I might get shit for it, but I do truly believe if we're doing couples therapy or coaching even, that we see each individual separately and then the couple together. Because as for coaches listening, that's going to give you so much information that you normally wouldn't get just solely with a couple together. Plus, you get to create relationships with each individual, and then you have a separate relationship with the couple, right? Now, they should be unbiased relationships. The next thing is ask them their modalities. If they are just kind of like cognitive behavioral therapists, that's great. It's a great form of therapy. But for me, cognitive behavioral is, what is the thought? Okay, what is behavior? Change the thought, change the behavior. Now, it's not solely that. But if you're working with someone, ask them their approach, like what is their understanding on codependency? What is their understanding of attachment wounds? What is their understanding of how trauma affects relationships? These are questions that you will want to ask. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't have a lot of trauma. Yes, you do. We all have trauma, and it shows up in a relationship. So if you're sitting in that chair and you're not doing it proactively to avoid situations, then you probably have some trauma that you have to uncover. And the last one is not necessarily a question, but through your first conversation with this person, you should feel like they understand what progress would look like for you. And maybe ask for a summary of that. Like, what would progress look like for this couple? You would ultimately be the people to decide that. But like, that is a very important question. I ask all of my clients that on our first clarity call before I've even become their coach. And I like to ask that. If you left my office right now and that door was a magic door, what would be different if a miracle happened and all of your problems were gone? Like, what would be different? That's such a great question. You could ask yourself that too and reiterate that to the therapist. This is what we're ultimately looking for. Like, do you feel that you can help us accomplish that. So that's it. I thought this was just a really great conversation, especially I know for my coaching program, people invest a good amount of money. I only see a select few clients. And at this point, I am on a waiting list for my dating and relationship coaching. Well, I have a clarity call tomorrow. So we'll see if the waiting list still stands. But I think that if you're spending the money, you're taking the time, and really it's not even about the money or time, it's about the relationship. You care about the relationship, you should receive the support that you need, right? It's like a personal trainer. My friend's husband went to a personal trainer, had no plan, didn't have a workout, didn't keep track of his reps, his sets, his weights. He just showed up and did a bunch of bench press. And that's not the way to do it. Whereas if you go to another trainer who has a game plan, who's working in a well-phased style of training, they're keeping track of your progress, that's going to be a much better experience and you're going to get to your goal faster. So those are just some things to think about. If this made your stomach a little bit sick because you're like, shit, that's my coach, trust it, right? It might be time to ask for different help. And of course, I'm always here for that conversation. As I said, I might be on a waiting list, but you can also always reach out to me to see if there's an opportunity to work together. With that said, I thank you guys again for joining me today. Again, if you haven't, make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. And as always, I love a 5-star rating and review. And as always, I'm going to leave you with this. It might be deja vu, but it also might be you. Bye-bye.